Vacation at Greens Mill Camp. Written by Donis Crane. Performed by Donis Crane. Chapter 4. Midnight Landlines. One night during our vacation at Greens Mill Camp in Missouri, I was sleeping soundly in the pop-up camper tent. I was cozy with my family all around me. It was after midnight when I heard Daddy quietly say, "Kids, come on. We need to get the fish off the limb lines." Daddy was smart about fishing. Our family had been at Greens Mill Camp for 2 days. That day, when we kids were fishing from the bank, he and Uncle George had been fishing out in the boat on the main part of the lake. On their way back to camp at the end of the day, just as they were entering the mouth of the Little Niangua River, they began to look for bends along the shore. They also looked for a spot where logs had fallen into the water just along the bank, but where the water still had a little current flowing over the fallen logs. Fish would sometimes take shelter near the end of the log that was still underwater. On their way back to camp at the end of the day, just as they were entering the mouth of the Little Niangua River, they began to look for bends along the shore. They also looked for a spot where logs had fallen into the water just along the bank, but where the water still had a little current flowing over the fallen logs. Fish would sometimes take shelter near the end of the log that was still underwater. Daddy or Uncle George tied a fishing line to a long, flexible limb that stuck out over the water close to the fallen log. They put a sinker and hook on the end of the line. They baited the hook with a couple of big fat worms and dropped the line, hook, and worms directly into the water. They tied a piece of white cloth to the fishing line above the water level. Daddy said it was so they could see where the line was in the dark. They were called limb lines or land lines. The fishing lines would be checked 2 or 3 times during the day and usually 1 time at night. That was why Daddy woke us up in the middle of the night. We had to go check the limb lines. Daddy took Uncle George's boat because it was bigger and had a stronger motor. When he pushed the throttle all the way out, the front of the boat would rise up, and the back of the boat, where the motor was, and where Daddy sat, would go lower in the water. I liked being out on the lake in the boat. I started yelling, "Faster, Daddy, faster!" But Daddy shushed me to keep quiet. It was after midnight, and other campers were asleep in their tents. Daddy started down the river, driving the boat toward the lake. When we got almost to the lake, he turned the boat around and began to make his way back toward camp. He was driving slowly. Daddy was sailing the boat close to the bank. He moved the big spotlight to shine on the limbs, trying to spot the piece of white cloth he or Uncle George had tied to the line and to see if the limb was bouncing. If it was bouncing, that meant there was a fish on the end of the line. Daddy would turn the motor off and tip it toward him to the top of the boat and out of the water, so the motor blades would not hit on anything underwater. From there, he moved the boat forward using just the paddles. That way, we could sail up close to the bank and take the fish off the fishing lines dangling from the limbs. I liked to check the lines. I felt very responsible. I had to sit on the bench seat that was closest to the front of the boat while Daddy paddled closer to shore. Daddy would always let me check the lines because I was bigger and taller than Tommy and Lonetta, and I was not afraid of the fish that were caught on the limb lines. I wasn't even afraid if it was a big catfish with barbs that looked like a cat's whiskers sticking out its face and sides. Daddy had taught me how to hold a catfish so it would not poke my hand with its barbs. Sometimes, though, there would be a turtle hooked on the line. I wasn't afraid of turtles either. Daddy was aggravated because he said that turtles used the fisherman's good work to catch the fish and the turtles would come up and eat them right off the hook. I just took the hook out of the turtle's mouth and let it go in the water. Daddy had hooked a stringer to the side of the boat. Every time I took a fish off the line, I turned toward Tommy with it. Tommy took hold of the fish too. I held its mouth and Tommy held it around its belly. Tommy held the metal part of the stringer in his other hand. While we both held on to the fish, Tommy threaded the metal part through the fish's mouth and out its gills. Daddy had showed us how to hold on to the fish and put the stringer in its mouth. We had to work together so the fish wouldn't wiggle and slip out of our hands. After it was securely fastened to the stringer, Tommy dropped the fish back into the water, and I baited the hook with a couple of big fat worms and dropped the line back into the water to try to catch another fish. After I dropped the line, Daddy paddled backwards, away from the bank before he started the motor to move the boat toward the center of the river. As we worked, limb after limb, we were getting closer and closer to the camp. Daddy let Lonetta crawl back to the bench seat at the back of the boat and hold on to the handle of the boat motor. Sometimes he would turn loose of the handle and let her steer by herself. If she steered off course, Daddy would help her straighten the course. While we were sailing, Daddy kept the spotlight off. Even with the little motor on the boat, it was quiet on the river. All of a sudden, Daddy said in a hushed voice, "Look, kids, there's a big old buzzard sitting over there on the bank. He must be watching for fish to swim up close to the bank where he can catch them." Daddy quickly turned on the big spotlight and shined it toward the buzzard so we could get a better look. But there was trouble. It wasn't a buzzard. It was a man all hunched over and fishing out of the side of his boat in the dark. Sound carried in this little valley, especially out on the water. Embarrassed and sure that the man had heard him, Daddy quietly said, "Evening." The fisherman quietly said, "How do?" Daddy shut off his light and we sailed on up the river toward camp. I could hear the man chuckling as we sailed by. We had a good night and caught 8 big catfish. Daddy said, "We're almost finished with the limb lines. We only have a few more to check." We spotted another bouncing line with his big spotlight and pulled the boat close to the bank. He shut the motor off and used the paddle to get right up under the limb where he had hung the fishing line during the day with Uncle George. The front of the boat was under the limb. I reached out to grab the line. Suddenly, Daddy said sharply, "Donis, get back here with me. Kids, sit still." When Daddy spoke in that tone of voice, we kids did just what we were told, without questions. Quick as a flash, I moved over the seats past Tommy and Lonetta to the back of the boat where Daddy sat. He whispered again, "Keep quiet, stay down." Daddy quietly but quickly paddled backwards, moving the boat away from the shore. The boat was safely out from under the limb. Daddy left the back of the boat, leaving it adrift. "What are you doing, Daddy?" I asked. "Hush now, Donnie girl," Daddy said. Taking one of the paddles with him, he moved to the front of the boat where I had been. He glanced back quickly to make sure we kids were safe and still sitting down. Then he reached out his arm, holding the paddle out as far as his arm would reach. He could barely reach to the limb that the land line was hanging from. I was afraid he was going to fall into the river. He made a swinging motion with the paddle like a baseball player swinging at a ball. He knocked a snake off the limb into the water. The boat rocked in the water, but Daddy steadied it by standing still. He moved back into the safety of the boat. He wasn't taking any chances of that snake falling into the boat with his kids. He said it was a water moccasin. Water moccasins are very poisonous snakes. Daddy knew about snakes. Sometimes on summer evenings when he was working in his garden, he would catch a garter snake. He would hold it, pinching his fingers just behind its neck so it dangled from his hands. He would come running toward one of us kids, making that kid holler. The garter snakes would not hurt anyone. They ate bugs out of the garden and helped the garden grow. But I didn't care. I did not like any snakes and would not touch them. Mama said it was best to leave snakes alone because some snakes would bite, and it was better to be safe than sorry. We were all scared of the snake Daddy knocked down off the limb. We thought about what could have happened if Daddy had not spotted the snake. We thought about what if Daddy had not known what to do, or if we kids had been naughty and didn't mind him. One of us might have been in trouble and hurt by that snake. Lonetta began to cry. Daddy soothed her and said, "Hush, Lonetta, we are all okay. That big old snake cannot hurt us now." Daddy said, "I think we've had enough fishing and checking limb lines for one night." He started the motor and trolled back to camp.